A Valentine's Day, a day of flowers, chocolates, and whispered promises. A day when the world tells us love should look a certain way, perfect, passionate, pure. But behind the red hearts and carefully crafted cards lies a much darker story. One of obsession, of betrayal, of control disguised as affection. In this episode of True Crime Echoes, I'm taking you on a journey through the twisted history of Valentine's Day, from ancient rituals and saints to the real-life tragedies that unfolded in the name of love. Because when love turns toxic, the consequences can be deadly. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a reflection on how we define love, how we romanticize pain, and what it really means to be safe, to be seen, to be loved. Chapter 1. The math behind my birthday. You ever get bored and start doing weird math in your head? Not like school math. I mean the personal kind, emotional math. Like the kind that tells you how you got here, why you were born, when you were conceived. Yeah, that kind of math. So one night I'm just lying in bed and I start thinking about my birthday. I was born in late November, and for whatever reason I decide to subtract 9 months from that. You know, do a little backwards math. And where do I land February, Valentine's Day? And suddenly I'm like, oh no. Did my parents, create me on Valentine's Day? At first I kind of laughed it off like, okay, cute. But the more I sat with it, the more it felt weird. I mean, Valentine's Day is already such a loaded day. The whole world puts pressure on this one date to represent passion, intimacy, romance. And then here I am, a walking, talking souvenir of that social construct. It's strange, right? Like, was I a product of love or a product of expectation? I don't know why, but the thought kind of bummed me out. Maybe it's sweet in theory, maybe it's tragic, maybe both, and maybe that's why I've always had a weird relationship with Valentine's Day. Because let me be real with you, I don't love it. It's not just the crowds or the overpriced dinners or the aggressively pink marketing. It's the way the holiday makes everything feel performative. Like if you don't book the reservation, buy the flowers, write the perfect message. Are you even in love? And if you're single, well then, congratulations. You get to feel like an extra in a movie that's not about you. So I started asking myself, why do we even have a holiday for love? What makes this one day so special that the world stops to honor it? Is it just capitalism in a red dress? Or is there something deeper there? A truth we've forgotten under all the glitter and heart-shaped boxes? That curiosity, that question, led me down a rabbit hole I didn't expect. What started as me doing math about my birthday somehow unraveled into a bloody, bizarre, and kind of terrifying history of Valentine's Day. A history that includes fertility cults, naked rituals, forced marriages, and yes, candy hearts. Spoiler, it didn't begin with roses and teddy bears. So if you've ever rolled your eyes at Valentine's Day or felt a little out of place on February 14th, this one's for you. Because trust me, once you know where it came from, you might never look at it the same way again. Let's start at the very beginning. And by beginning, I mean ancient Rome. Chapter 2. Blood wolves and goatskin thongs. Rome's dark beginning. So, Valentine's Day and I. We've had our awkward moments, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for where this holiday actually began. Because if you rewind far enough way before Hallmark cards and roses before Cupid was a chubby baby, shooting arrows at couples, you end up in a place that's a little less romantic. Ancient Rome. Now, ancient Rome wasn't exactly known for subtlety. These people went hard in politics, in war, in sex, and apparently in festivals. And tucked right there in mid-February, almost exactly where Valentine's Day lives now, was a little celebration called Lupercalia. Sounds kind of beautiful, right? Like maybe it has something to do with spring or music or love. Yeah, no. Lupercalia was unhinged. It all starts with a legend, the story of Romulus and Remus. These twin brothers were said to be the founders of Rome. And according to the myth, they were abandoned as babies, placed in a basket, and discovered by a she-wolf. Yep, a literal wolf. Not only did she find them, she nursed them, raised them. Let that sink in Rome, one of the most powerful empires in history believed it was birthed by wolf milk. And weirdly enough, they were kind of proud of that. So every year, to honor this wild origin story, the Romans held a fertility festival in the same cave where the she-wolf supposedly raised the boys. They called it Lupercalia, after lupus, the Latin word for wolf. But don't let the name fool you. This wasn't a quiet candlelight vigil. This was chaos in togas. It all began with a sacrifice, usually goats and dogs chosen because they were apparently the horniest animals they could find. The priests, and I'm not making this up, would strip completely naked, then slit the animals' throats, smear the blood across their own foreheads, and laugh. Laughing was actually part of the ritual. Like, picture a bunch of bloody naked men in a cave cracking up while they wipe goat blood off each other. It was supposed to represent joy and fertility. To me, it sounds like the world's worst bachelor party. But it gets weirder. After the blood ritual, they'd take strips of goat hide from the freshly killed animals and turn them into makeshift thongs. Then, still naked, they'd run through the streets of Rome, whipping women with those bloody goat thongs. And here's the part that really made me pause. Women wanted to be whipped. Like they would line up in the streets to be slapped across the body with a piece of goat skin. Why? Because it was believed to bring good luck. More specifically, it was supposed to increase fertility. You know, nothing says romance like public flagellation with goat flesh. There was even a lottery. Unmarried women would put their names in a jar, and men would draw them out pairing off for the rest of the festival. Some of these couples would stay together for a year, some got married. But make no mistake, this wasn't sweet. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't consensual in the way we understand that word today. This was a system designed to control women's bodies in the name of population growth. So when people say Valentine's Day is about love, it's kind of wild to realize that its ancient roots were soaked in blood violence and forced pairings. And the timing, February 15th, just one day after what we now call Valentine's Day, you see the overlap, right? Somehow, what started as a bizarre, wolf-themed fertility ritual became the modern celebration of romance and devotion. But that didn't happen overnight. Something, or rather someone, came along to interrupt the party. A man with a robe, a cross, and a whole lot of opinions about sin. And that's where we're heading next, because the church didn't just cancel Lupercalia, they transformed it. And the story of how they did that, it's just as twisted. Let's talk about Saint Valentine. Chapter 3, The Saint Who Stole the Festival. So after reading about Lupercalia, the blood, the goat thongs, the whipping, I had to sit back and ask, how the hell did we go from that to teddy bears and Hallmark cards? Because somewhere along the way, someone clearly decided that public nudity and sacrificial blood rituals weren't exactly the vibe anymore. And that someone was the early Christian church. See, by the late 400s, AD Rome wasn't just a military powerhouse. It had also become deeply, almost aggressively Christian. The old gods were out. The cross was in. And one pope in particular was not vibing with the whole Lupercalia situation. His name was Pope Gelasius I, and in the year 494 AD, he officially banned Lupercalia. Just like that. No more cave rituals. No more goat whipping. No more excuse for dudes to run naked through the streets under the guise of fertility. But here's the thing, you can't just erase a tradition that people love, especially one as wild and exciting as Lupercalia. The people weren't just gonna let it go, so the church did what the church does best, they rebranded it. And here's where St. Valentine enters the chat. Now here's the funny part. There isn't just one St. Valentine. There are multiple. And their stories are fuzzy at best. The most popular version says that Valentine was a Christian priest living under Roman rule at a time when the emperor had banned marriages. Apparently he believed that unmarried men made better soldiers, you know, fewer distractions, no one waiting at home. So marriage was off the table, but Valentine didn't agree with that. In fact, he thought love was sacred, worth risking everything for. So he started secretly marrying couples in defiance of the emperor's orders. Of course he got caught, and in classic Roman fashion, he was arrested, tortured, and sentenced to death. But here's where the story turns bittersweet. While in prison, Valentine allegedly fell in love with the jailer's daughter, or at least grew close to her. Some versions say she was blind and that he miraculously healed her sight. The night before his execution, he supposedly wrote her a note and signed it, "From your Valentine." I mean, that's poetic and tragic and honestly kind of beautiful. He was executed on February 14th, and years later, the church decided to declare him a martyr, a symbol of pure, selfless love. And they gave him a feast day, right around the same time that Lupercalia used to be celebrated. Coincidence? Yeah, no. This was strategy. By replacing a pagan fertility festival with a Christian martyrs' feast, the church effectively absorbed the old holiday, wiped away its chaotic origins, and gave people something pure to celebrate instead. But let's be honest, you don't just erase centuries of goat-blooded tradition overnight. You can put a robe on it. You can add a saint's name to the calendar. But the energy, that raw, messy human craving for connection, that doesn't just go away. And honestly, that tension between sacred and sexual, between divine love and human desire, it never really left Valentine's Day. It just got dressed up differently. So now we've got this weird hybrid of history, a holiday born from both ritual and religion, from violence and virtue. And it's only going to get stranger from here. Because the next twist in Valentine's evolution, it doesn't come from the church. It comes from a poet. And he's about to do something the Romans and the saints never did. He's going to make Valentine's Day romantic. Let's talk about Geoffrey Chaucer. Chapter 4. When Love Took the Stage. So up until this point, Valentine's Day was basically a Frankenstein's monster. A little bit pagan, a little bit Christian. Blood sacrifices on one side, saints, and purity on the other. A messy mix of history control and symbolism, but still not romantic. That part, the hearts and poems and fluttery feelings, that came much later. And weirdly enough, we owe that shift to a man named Geoffrey Chaucer. Yeah, that Chaucer. The guy who wrote the Canterbury Tales. You probably had to read it in school, or at least pretend you did. Now, Chaucer was many things: poet, diplomat, court insider. But most importantly for this story, he was a writer who understood the power of words. And in the 1300s, he decided to do something kind of groundbreaking. He wrote a poem called Parliament of Fowls, and in it, he connected the idea of romantic love to St. Valentine's Day. This had never been done before. Up to that point, Valentine's Day was more about religious observance and sainthood. But Chaucer, being Chaucer, took some creative liberties. In the poem, birds, yes, actual birds gather in a field on Valentine's Day to choose their mates for the season. It's like an avian version of The Bachelor with feathers and drama and poetic metaphors. But here's what made it matter. Chaucer wrote this one line, "For this was on St. Valentine's Day, when every fowl cometh there to choose his mate." And just like that, the connection was made. Valentine's Day, mating day, not just for birds, but for humans too. And people loved it. Because, let's be real, people have always craved stories that validate their emotions. And Chaucer was giving people permission to associate this date, February 14th, with longing, flirtation, and the possibility of love. From there, it snowballed. Writers and poets across Europe picked up the theme and ran with it. Valentine's Day became the perfect backdrop for courtly love, that whole medieval, tortured, poetic, "I wrote you a sonnet while dying in war" kind of thing. And in a time when most marriages were arranged for money, land, or status, the idea of choosing your partner out of love felt radical. Romantic, even. Suddenly people started calling their crushes my Valentine. Love letters were written, tokens exchanged. And the holiday took on a life of its own, not through the church, not through the state, but through art. It's funny, isn't it? It wasn't politics or religion that turned Valentine's Day into a celebration of love. It was a poem, a story, a simple metaphor about birds choosing their mates. And that's the thing about history sometimes. The most lasting changes come not from power, but from poetry. But even though this poetic rebranding made Valentine's Day softer, sweeter, it still had room to get a little weird, a little magical, especially once the Victorians got a hold of it. Because when it comes to secret love spells, divination, and deeply passive-aggressive gifting, The Victorians were kind of unmatched. Let's talk about them next. Chapter 5: Spells, Secrets, and Love Gloves. The Victorians take over. By the time Valentine's Day entered the Victorian era, it had officially transformed from a bloody Roman ritual into a poetic excuse to talk about feelings. But leave it to the Victorians to take something sweet and turn it into a full-on theatrical production. Now, if you know anything about the Victorians, you know they were extra. They were sentimental and superstitious, repressed and romantic all at once. Like they'd write you a heartfelt love poem and then faint because your ankle was showing. And Valentine's Day. Oh, they went in on Valentine's Day. Especially the women. Because even though society told them to be polite, passive, and pure, the truth is a lot of Victorian women were out here doing spells. Yes, actual love magic. There were full-on rituals women would do the night before Valentine's Day. They'd sneak into churchyards at midnight hoping to catch an omen, or they'd place herbs like bay leaves or hemp seeds under their pillows, believing it would make them dream of their future husband. It sounds dramatic, but I get it. These women didn't have dating apps or Instagram DMs. Sometimes all you had was a midnight seance and a handful of bay leaves. But the spells weren't just for fun. There was real hope behind them. A desire for agency in a world where women didn't always get to choose who they married, or if they married at all. So Valentine's Day became this moment, this annual window, where women could maybe claim a bit of power, or at least peek into their romantic fate. And that wasn't the only creative thing going on. Victorians also loved their symbolism. Every flower had a meaning, every gift carried a message, and nothing was accidental. One of my favorite examples, love gloves. Okay, bear with me. I know that sounds like a euphemism, but I promise it's real. In crowded social settings where flirting wasn't exactly encouraged, men would send embroidered gloves to the women they were secretly crushing on. The glove would arrive by butler dramatic, of course, and the woman would respond with a gesture. If she twirled the glove around her finger, it meant she noticed and liked the attention. If she put the glove on, that was basically a 19th century version of let's go. And if she folded it up and put it away, well, that was a polite thanks, but no thanks. All of this, by the way, happened across the room. No words exchanged, just gloves and glances and silent communication like a Jane Austen fever dream. And the gifts didn't stop there. Wealthy Victorians would go all out. We're talking diamond-encrusted rings, poetry tucked in lace, even locks of hair sealed in miniature envelopes. Romantic, maybe. A little creepy, definitely. But even if you weren't royalty or rich, there was still a way to play the game. People started doing what they called drawing lots, like a romantic secret Santa. Everyone's name went into a jar, and whoever you picked, that was your Valentine. It was sweet, inclusive, and low pressure. Unless, of course, you got someone you really didn't like. There were also puzzle purses, tiny origami-style love notes that folded out into riddles or fortunes. Some of them were playful, others were practically proposals. But all of them required time effort and a certain level of emotional risk. And maybe that's what made it all so intense. Back then, there wasn't 1,000 texts or dating profiles to hide behind. You had one day, one gesture, one moment to show someone that they mattered, or to humiliate them. Because as we'll see, the Victorians didn't just invent romantic gestures, they also perfected the art of rejection. And their method, let's just say it wasn't subtle. It was called a vinegar Valentine. And if you've never heard of that before, oh, you're in for something deliciously petty. Chapter 6: The Dark Side of Love Letters, Vinegar Valentines. So by now, Valentine's Day had become this wildly emotional occasion. People were falling in love, performing spells, exchanging gifts, and risking it all with handwritten poems. But here's the thing about emotions, they're messy. Not everyone gets the love story, not everyone wants it, and not everyone handles rejection well. The Victorians understood this a little too well. Because hidden beneath all the lace and flowers and embroidered gloves was something darker, something mean, petty, sharp. They called it the Vinegar Valentine. Now, if you've never heard of a Vinegar Valentine before, brace yourself. It was basically the anti-Valentine's Day card. A nasty little note designed to insult, humiliate, or reject someone, often anonymously. It was cruel, it was cutting, and it was wildly popular. You'd walk into a stationery shop, and alongside the sweet cards, the ones with cupids and poetry, there'd be these cheap printed cards with cartoonish drawings and vicious little poems, and people loved them. These weren't just "I'm not interested" notes. They were savage. One might say something like, "To you I dedicate this verse, for you I always think the worst. Your vanity makes people sneer, on Valentines just disappear." Another one might show a caricature of a man with a giant nose and read, "You think you're charming, smart, and slick, but truth be told, you make me sick." It's funny, sure, until you realize people were actually sending these to each other. And the kicker, you had to pay postage to receive one. So not only were you being insulted, you were literally paying for the privilege. It sounds outrageous now, but back then this was considered a socially acceptable way to reject someone, shame them, or just tell them they annoyed you. And it wasn't limited to romance. People sent vinegar valentines to coworkers, neighbors, even store clerks who rubbed them the wrong way. It became this passive-aggressive outlet for all the frustration people normally weren't allowed to express out loud, especially women who were expected to always be polite, quiet, agreeable. Sending a vinegar valentine, that was rebellion in a lace-trimmed envelope. But like most things fueled by public shame, it didn't always go well. There are actual newspaper reports from the 1800s describing violent reactions to these cards. One man was said to have taken his own life after receiving one. Another shot his estranged wife because she mailed him a particularly cruel vinegar valentine. It was that serious. And I know it sounds extreme. But we see echoes of this kind of behavior today. Anonymous DMs, burn book Instagram pages, public callouts. The platforms change, but the impulse. That desire to hurt someone back when we feel rejected or powerless, that's timeless. Still, I can't help but wonder, was there something oddly liberating about the vinegar valentine? Like, yeah, it was rude unnecessarily so, but maybe it was the only way people back then could assert boundaries or express frustration or just opt out of the whole Valentine's Day pressure altogether. Maybe it was their way of saying, "No, I don't love you. No, I don't want to smile politely. Here's my honesty, ugly and unfiltered." In a twisted way, it feels kind of refreshing. And if nothing else, it reminds us that not all love stories are mutual, and not every Valentine's Day ends in a fairy tale. But don't worry, things don't stay bitter forever, because just when Valentine's Day was teetering between poetry and pettiness, a new character entered the scene. A woman, a pioneer. Someone who didn't just send cards, she built an empire from them. Her name was Esther Howland, and if you've ever bought or received a Valentine's Day card in your life, you can probably thank her. Let's talk about how one woman commercialized love and changed American Valentine's Day forever. Chapter 7. The Woman Who Put a Price on Love After Reading About Vinegar Valentines. I honestly needed a break. The shade, the cruelty, the postage fees. It all made me wonder, was Valentine's Day ever going to be sweet again? And then I found her. Esther Howland. Now, if you've never heard of her, don't worry, I hadn't either. But once I started digging, I realized she might be one of the most influential women behind the way we experience Valentine's Day today. Not a poet, not a saint, not a Roman priest, just a 19th century woman with some glue lace and a brilliant business brain. Esther was born in 1828 in Worcester, Massachusetts. Her father owned a stationery and bookshop, a successful one. So Esther grew up around paper ink and the idea that written words could carry real weight. But it wasn't until she received a fancy English Valentine's card, imported delicate and expensive, that something clicked in her. She looked at this beautifully decorated card and thought, wait a second, I can make this, and I can probably make it better. She was in her early 20s. No business experience, just a belief that Americans didn't need to import their romance from Europe. She could do it herself. So she ordered supplies, lace-embossed paper, fine ribbon, and little painted scraps. And with the help of a few local women, she started assembling handmade Valentine's cards right from her home. She called them Valentines, yes, but these weren't your average folded notes. They were ornate, layered, almost sculptural, tiny love altars sealed in paper. At first, she asked her brother, who was a traveling salesman, to take a small box of samples on one of his business trips, just to see if any shops were interested. She hoped to get maybe $200 worth of orders. He came back with $5,000 in requests. That was her light bulb moment. Esther got to work big time. She hired women, which was rare in that era, and set up one of the first all-women assembly lines in the U.S. Each woman had a role: cutting, pasting, lettering, folding. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a full-blown business. And Esther. She wasn't just making cards. She was making symbols of affection, of artistry, of American womanhood. She took something deeply personal, love, and figured out how to scale it. In a time when women were expected to marry well and stay quiet, Esther built a brand. She didn't just follow tradition, she rewrote it in glitter and lace. Her company, the New England Valentine Company, made her a household name. At her peak, she was selling tens of thousands of cards every year. And this was before email, before texting, before Amazon Prime. Everything had to be cut by hand, folded by hand, mailed by hand. And still, people bought them. Because Esther tapped into something universal: the desire to be seen, cherished, remembered, especially on one specific day in February. What blows my mind is how quietly revolutionary her work was. She took a holiday that had been shaped by men, emperors, priests, poets, and gave it back to women. She created a new kind of power, the power of emotional expression as commerce. And she did it with paper and paste. Of course, as her business grew, so did the competition. Mass production took over. Eventually, her company merged with others, and her name faded from the public eye. But her fingerprints, they're still all over every grocery store aisle, every February, every heart-shaped envelope, every handwritten note. Esther Howland may not have invented Valentine's Day, but she gave it a face, a format, a price tag. And whether you love that or hate it, there's no denying. She changed the game, but with great success came great opportunity, and not everyone used that opportunity as sweetly as Esther did. Because as the 20th century rolled and Valentine's Day got bigger, and louder, and surprise, surprise, corporate. Let's talk about the rise of Hallmark. Chapter 8. When Hallmark took the heart. By the time the 20th century rolled around, Valentine's Day had already worn a lot of faces. It had been pagan and Christian, poetic and petty, sacred and sarcastic. But now, it was about to become something else entirely. It was about to become big business. Enter Hallmark. Now I know just saying the name probably brings up an image in your mind. Maybe a soft pastel card with glitter and cursive writing. Maybe a commercial with a violin soundtrack and a perfectly lit hug. Maybe one of those cheesy holiday movies with small towns and surprise love stories. But Hallmark didn't start that way. The company began in 1910 when a teenage boy named Joyce Clyde Hall started selling postcards out of his backpack in Kansas City. That's it. Just one guy with a dream and a handful of paper. But Joyce, or JC as he was called, had vision. He saw that people craved emotion, but they didn't always know how to express it. And more importantly, he realized something a lot of us still feel today. Sometimes it's easier to let the card do the talking. So Hallmark expanded from postcards to greeting cards, from birthdays and holidays to anniversaries, and of course Valentine's Day. And once the 1920s hit, things took off. Hallmark wasn't just selling cards anymore, they were selling feelings, packaged, printed, polished feelings. They created slogans like, "When you care enough to send the very best." They hired poets and illustrators. They built entire factories dedicated to printing what was once handwritten. And in doing so, they didn't just reflect the culture. They started to shape it. Because here's the thing, when a company gets that big, it doesn't just follow trends. It creates expectations. Suddenly, Valentine's Day wasn't just a personal tradition. It was a national event. You didn't just maybe write a note to your sweetheart. You bought a card, maybe candy, maybe flowers, and if you didn't, well, it meant something. Or at least it looked like it did. And honestly, I'm torn about that. On the one hand, I love the idea of making people feel special. I think a small gesture, a thoughtful message really can go a long way. But on the other hand, Hallmark turned love into a transaction. It turned a deeply personal emotion into a seasonal obligation, into a sales quota. And let's not forget this wasn't just about romantic love. As Valentine's Day grew, it expanded into classrooms, office parties, group settings. Suddenly, you weren't just buying a card for your partner, you were buying for your teacher, your coworkers, your kids' classmates. Entire shelves of pink and red flooded stores every February, stuffed animals, chocolate boxes, balloon bouquets, and every year the message was clear: if you love someone, you buy something. Which begs the question, at what point does the ritual stop being meaningful and just become habit? That's not to say Hallmark ruined love. I don't think they did. But they definitely commodified it. They gave us structure, a script. And like most scripts, it works until it doesn't. Because not everyone wants roses. Not everyone wants a poem written by someone else. Some people just want honesty, or space, or silence. But Hallmark made it feel like there was one correct way to love on Valentine's Day, and that if you didn't play along, you were somehow doing it wrong. It's a lot of pressure when you think about it, and honestly, that pressure only grew once Hollywood got involved. Because cards and chocolates were one thing, but movies told us how love was supposed to feel. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about what happens when Valentine's Day goes cinematic and why the silver screen might be the most seductive and dangerous storyteller of all. Chapter 9: Lights, Camera Illusion. When love became a movie. By the time I was a teenager, I thought I knew what Valentine's Day was supposed to feel like. I'd seen it 100 times. The grand gestures, the breathless confessions, the airport scenes, the rainy reunions, the slow-motion kiss right before the credits roll. I wasn't getting that from history books or greeting cards. I was getting it from Hollywood. And honestly, that's where the real myth of Valentine's Day was written. Because somewhere between Esther Howland's lace-trimmed tokens and Hallmark's sentimental slogans, movies came in and gave us something even more powerful than tradition, or marketing a fantasy. It started slowly with black and white classics, the ones where a man in a suit says all the right things, and the woman forgives everything with one look. Then came the golden age of romantic comedies. Casablanca, Roman Holiday, An Affair to Remember. The idea of love became cinematic. Suddenly, romance had a soundtrack. It had perfect lighting, witty banter, last-minute chases, and magical coincidences. And whether we realized it or not, our expectations started to shift. We weren't just looking for love anymore. We were looking for a story, one that felt dramatic enough, painful enough, beautiful enough to be worthy of the screen. And Valentine's Day. It became the stage for all of it. I remember watching those movies growing up and thinking, wow, if someone doesn't run through traffic to confess their love for me, is it even real? We laugh about it now, but that kind of messaging sticks. Because the movies didn't just show us what love could look like, they showed us what it should look like. And that's dangerous. Because in real life, love is rarely that glamorous. It's not always champagne and roses. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's silent and hard and deeply unremarkable on the outside. But movies taught us to crave drama, to associate chaos with passion, to believe that heartbreak was just the setup for a better ending. And so Valentine's Day became a mirror for that belief. You weren't just celebrating a relationship, you were performing it for your partner, for your friends, for social media. And if your version didn't look like the movies, if it wasn't epic or Instagram-worthy, it started to feel like a failure. I've seen people stay in toxic relationships because they believed love is supposed to be hard. I've watched people sabotage something good, chasing a more dramatic high. And I've been there too, trying to mold reality into something it never promised to be. Because that's the thing about Hollywood love stories, they fade to black before the real work begins. They don't show you the Sunday arguments, the emotional baggage, the quiet compromises that never make it into the script. And yet we celebrate Valentine's Day like we're all co-stars in our own romantic film. as if the holiday isn't complete without the scene. But here's what I've learned. Real love doesn't always come with violins. Sometimes it's just two people choosing each other, day after day, in quiet, unseen ways. And maybe that's not movie material, but it's real. And honestly, that kind of love deserves more recognition than it gets. Still, Hollywood's version of love isn't going anywhere. It sells, it seduces, it gives people hope. But it also comes at a cost. Because when you expect every February 14th to feel like a blockbuster, what happens when your real life just doesn't? And that's the pressure I want to talk about next. Because behind the hearts and flowers, behind the cards, the gifts, the dinner reservations, there's a darker truth. Valentine's Day, for all its sweetness, can hurt. Let's talk about that. Chapter 10. When Love Hurts. The Loneliness of Valentine's Day. There's something I've been wanting to say, something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Valentine's Day can be really hard, not just awkward, not just overrated. I mean deeply, quietly painful. Because for every couple celebrating with flowers and candlelight, there's someone sitting alone pretending it doesn't bother them. Someone scrolling through posts trying not to feel left out. Someone who didn't get a text, didn't get a card, didn't get chosen, and I know that feeling. Because I've been that person, the one who thought it's just a made-up holiday, right? Who cares? But then watched the world explode in hearts and glitter and reminders that love is happening all around you and not necessarily to you. It's isolating. Not because you don't have people who care about you, but because romantic love gets treated like the highest currency. The thing that proves you're lovable, valuable, deserving. And when you don't have it or you've lost it, Valentine's Day can feel like an annual performance you didn't get cast in. No one talks about that. Not in the commercials, not on the Hallmark shelves, not in the movies where everything works out by the third act. But it's real. And it's not just single people who feel it. There are people in unhappy relationships who dread February 14th because it forces them to pretend. To smile, to pose for pictures, to play the role when deep down they feel disconnected, or trapped, or forgotten. There are people who've lost their partners, widows and widowers trying to survive a day that used to mean something sweet and now just aches. And then there are the people dealing with breakups, trying to keep it together while everyone else is being celebrated and adored. You know it's wild. We've created a holiday where not having something, not having a date, a partner, a picture-perfect love feels like a personal failure. Like you missed a deadline or flunked a test. But here's the truth. I wish someone had told me years ago, you are not broken just because you're alone on Valentine's Day. And you're not failing if your life doesn't look like a rom-com. Being alone is not a punishment. Sometimes it's just the season you're in. And sometimes it's the most honest place you can be. But honesty doesn't sell greeting cards. So we're taught to hide that part. To make jokes about being single. To roll our eyes at the whole thing. To throw galentine's parties, or pretend we're too busy to care. And hey, if that works for you, great. But if it doesn't, that's okay too. You're allowed to feel sad. You're allowed to feel lonely. You're allowed to grieve the love you wanted and didn't get. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And here's what I've learned after years of watching this day come and go. Love is not just what you receive. It's not what someone else gives you in a shiny red box. Love is what you survive, what you protect, what you give to yourself when the world is too loud and too glossy and too full of fake smiles. Valentine's Day isn't just a celebration of love. It's also a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see in it. But there's power in being honest about that, about saying this is hard for me, about admitting that hearts and flowers don't fix everything. And once we start being honest, the day starts to lose a little of its sting. Because now it's not just about romance, it's about resilience. In the next chapter, I want to go even deeper because Valentine's Day hasn't just hurt feelings. In some cases, it's exposed something even darker: obsession, jealousy, rage. There are stories, real stories, where the pursuit of love, or the illusion of it, has ended in violence. Let's talk about the true crimes of Valentine's Day. Chapter 11. When Love Turns Deadly. True Crimes of Valentine's Day. I wish I could say Valentine's Day only ever broke hearts in quiet ways. That the worst it could do was make you feel lonely or left out or a little sad. But that's not true, because sometimes love doesn't just wound, it destroys. There's something about Valentine's Day, the pressure, the expectations, the illusion of perfect romance that seems to pull something dark out of people. And over the years, it's become clear that for some, this day isn't about love at all. It's about control, possession. And when that control slips through their fingers, things turn deadly. I've read more case files than I care to admit. And one pattern keeps showing up: Valentine's Day murders. They sound like tabloid headlines, but they're real. They happened, and they keep happening. Let me tell you about one. Richard and Stacy Shoak, Georgia, 2010. They seemed like any other suburban couple, married, blended family, decent jobs. But what unfolded on Valentine's Day that year was something straight out of a nightmare. Stacy told her husband to meet her at a local park. She said she had a surprise for him, something special to celebrate the holiday. But when Richard arrived, he wasn't met with roses or gifts. He was met with gunfire. Someone shot him multiple times, execution style, in the middle of that quiet park. His body was found slumped near his truck, and Stacy Shee played the grieving widow for a while. But investigators started to unravel the truth pretty quickly. The financial records, the life insurance policy, and eventually the secret affair. Turns out Stacy had hired a hitman through her new lover to kill her husband on the most romantic day of the year. Why Valentine's Day? Because that's when no one would suspect a thing. Because it was supposed to be about love. Because Richard would come willingly with his guard down. It was cold, calculated, and it worked for a moment. But the thing about love crimes is, they leave trails. Emotional ones, financial ones, and in Stacy's case, very literal ones. She was arrested along with the hitman and her lover. And in court, when everything came out, the betrayal, the lies, the money, it became clear this wasn't about love at all. It was about ownership, about seeing a partner not as a person, but as an obstacle, an inconvenience, a means to an end. And that story, it's just one of dozens. Another man poisoned his wife's chocolates. One woman staged a fake kidnapping of her ex. There are even cases where people sent Valentine's Day gifts as a trap, luring their targets to locations where they plan to ambush or harm them. I don't say all this to sensationalize it. This isn't about shock value. It's about facing a very real truth: love, when twisted, can be used as a weapon. And Valentine's Day, with all its symbolic weight, becomes the perfect cover for something sinister. Because no one expects violence on a day built around romance. No one suspects the person holding the bouquet. No one thinks the dinner reservation might be someone's last. And that's exactly why it works. Behind every true crime tied to this holiday, there's a pattern of betrayal, of unhealed obsession, of people trying to force love where it no longer exists, or maybe never existed at all. And in the worst cases, when they can't have it, they'd rather destroy it. It's the dark mirror of everything Valentine's Day claims to represent. And the more I look at these stories, the more I realize something unsettling. Maybe the holiday isn't just about love. Maybe it's about who gets to define love and what happens when they're told no. In the next chapter, I want to take you even deeper into one specific case. One that's haunted me for a long time. Because it didn't just happen on Valentine's Day. It redefined what revenge looks like when love turns to rage. Chapter 12. A Valentine's Day Execution. The case of Myra Davis. Sometimes when I research these stories, I have to stop and walk away. Not because the details are too graphic, but because the emotion behind them is too much. The desperation, the betrayal, the coldness. And this one stayed with me. It happened in Chicago in 2007. And on the surface, it looked like something out of a romance novel gone right. Myra Davis and Vincent Reynolds. High school sweethearts who had reconnected after more than a decade apart. She was 34, single mom nurse. He was 36, recently divorced, working in real estate. They found each other again on Facebook. the way so many people do these days. And when they started dating, it seemed like fate. Friends described them as inseparable. They were always out together, dinners, concerts, weekend trips. Vincent doted on Myra. She glowed in his presence. And then came Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2007. Myra had planned a quiet dinner at home. She told her sister earlier that week she was going to surprise Vincent with something personal, a framed photo of the two of them and a handwritten letter. She wanted to tell him she loved him. It would be the first time she'd said it out loud. But Myra never got the chance. That evening, neighbors reported hearing shouting coming from her apartment. Not just arguing, screaming, furniture hitting walls, glass breaking. By the time police were called, it was too late. They found Myra in her bedroom, her hands bound with a belt, multiple stab wounds to her chest and abdomen. She was surrounded by rose petals. The framed photo she had wrapped for Vincent was shattered on the floor, and Vincent gone, disappeared into the cold Chicago night. What followed was a manhunt, a community stunned, friends in disbelief, because no one, and I mean no one, saw this coming. Vincent had no criminal record, no documented history of violence, no public signs of instability. But as investigators dug deeper, a different picture started to emerge. Vincent was jealous, controlling in ways Myra hadn't told anyone. He'd once shown up at her work unannounced, accusing her of flirting with a patient's husband. Another time, he slashed the tires of a coworker who gave her a ride home. But Myra, she didn't press charges. She thought it was just insecurity. She thought he'd change. And maybe on some level, she was afraid to be alone again. But the most chilling detail came from her journal. Myra had written just 2 weeks before her death, "I love him, but something feels wrong, like I'm being watched even when I'm alone." It broke my heart reading that. Because so many women and men, too, find themselves caught in something that looks like love but isn't. It's control, disguised as passion, possessiveness, masquerading as commitment. And in Myra's case, it became lethal. Vincent was eventually arrested 3 days later in Indiana at a bus station. He had shaved his head, changed clothes, and had a bag of Myra's jewelry with him. In court, he never showed remorse. He claimed she had betrayed him by texting her ex, that he snapped. But this wasn't a snap. This was premeditated. He brought the knife, he took her phone. He waited until Valentine's Day to send the ultimate message: "If I can't have you, no one will." Vincent was sentenced to life without parole. And Myra, she became another statistic. Another woman silenced by someone who claimed to love her. But she was more than that. She was a mother, a daughter, a caregiver, a woman trying to believe in love again and ultimately punished for it. This case reminds me that sometimes the most dangerous place to be is in the arms of someone who says they care. Real love doesn't come with fear. It doesn't isolate you. It doesn't silence your gut. And if someone makes you feel small in the name of affection, that's not love. That's control. Valentine's Day is supposed to celebrate connection. But for Myra and too many others, it became the day their lives were taken. In the next chapter, I want to explore the psychology behind crimes of passion. Why do so many people kill the ones they claim to love? And what can we learn from their patterns before it's too late? Chapter 13, Love, Possession, and the Psychology of a Trigger. After spending so much time immersed in these stories, reading case files, watching interviews, trying to understand how someone goes from roses to revenge, one question keeps echoing in my mind. How does love turn into murder? It's a hard thing to wrap your head around, because we all want to believe that love is a healing thing, a hopeful thing. But under the wrong conditions, especially when obsession replaces affection, love becomes something dangerous, something that burns instead of warms. Psychologists have a term for it: crimes of passion. And what's fascinating and terrifying is how often these crimes don't stem from long-held hatred, but from a moment of emotional collapse. 1 second, one trigger, that's all it takes. It's like a dam holding back insecurity, control, unresolved childhood wounds. And then one perceived betrayal, real or imagined, and the dam breaks. And on Valentine's Day, when the pressure is dialed all the way up those cracks in the dam, they get deeper. Because Valentine's Day isn't just a celebration of love, it's a performance. It becomes a test. And for someone already feeling insecure or abandoned or not in control, any sign of rejection can feel like public humiliation, like a failure. I read a study once that said crimes of passion are rarely premeditated in the traditional sense. They're impulsive, emotional, but the emotion isn't always rage. Sometimes it's heartbreak, that sick, sinking feeling of being unwanted. And for people who equate love with identity, rejection doesn't just hurt, it threatens their entire sense of self. It's not, she left me. It's, I'm nothing without her. It's not, he cheated. It's, he made me feel invisible again. So what happens when someone doesn't know how to process that pain? They reach for control, for revenge, for something that feels like power again. And that's where it flips, from sadness to possession. They don't want reconciliation. They want to erase the person who made them feel powerless. And that's what's at the core of so many Valentine's Day crimes. Not love, not passion, possession. If I can't have you, no one will. It's the most chilling sentence. And yet we see it over and over in courtroom transcripts, in confessions, in suicide notes left after murder-suicides. It's not romance. It's rot. And it makes you realize how thin the line is between love and destruction when someone never learned to separate the two. When someone thinks being in love gives them ownership over your life, your body, your choices. The scary thing is these people don't always look dangerous. They're often charming, supportive, protective, until they're not. And the signs, they're subtle. The over-checking, the jealousy dressed up as concern, the where are you texts that start to feel like surveillance, the guilt trips when you spend time with other people, the slowly shrinking world you don't even realize is disappearing around you. I say this not to scare people, but to remind us that true crime isn't always about monsters in the dark. Sometimes it's about someone who said they loved you and didn't mean it the way you thought they did. In the next chapter, I want to look at something more hopeful, because we've seen the darkness and it's heavy. But there are also people out there using this holiday to reclaim it, to heal, to resist the pressure, the pain, the narrative that love has to look a certain way. Let's talk about the survivors, the ones who walked away, the ones who rebuilt, and the ones who said, "You don't get to define love for me." Chapter 14, Reclaiming Love, Survivors and the Power of Starting Over. After everything we've explored, the betrayals, the violence, the heartbreak wrapped in red ribbons, I think it's important to talk about something else too. What happens after? What happens when someone survives the very thing that was meant to break them? Because not every Valentine's Day story ends in tragedy. Some end in rebirth, not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, steady, powerful. I've spoken to survivors, women and men who escaped abusive relationships, people who spent years believing they weren't lovable unless they proved it over and over through sacrifice, silence, shrinking themselves. And when it finally fell apart, when the police reports were filed, or the suitcases were packed, or the goodbye was whispered through tears, they thought they'd never feel whole again, especially around Valentine's Day. Because that date that day carried a weight. It wasn't just a reminder of love, it was a trigger, a reminder of what was lost, or what could have been. But here's the incredible thing, healing doesn't always look like forgetting. Sometimes it looks like rewriting. There's this one woman I'll never forget, let's call her Rachel. Rachel was married to a man who controlled every part of her life. What she wore, what she ate, who she talked to. Every Valentine's Day, he made a grand gesture, jewelry, flowers, fancy dinners. To everyone on the outside, he looked like the perfect husband. But behind closed doors, Rachel was walking on eggshells. She told me that the more perfect the Valentine's gifts were, the more likely a fight would explode the next day. It took her 7 years to leave, but she did. with nothing but her daughter, a suitcase, and her name. For a while, she hated February. She couldn't look at pink hearts or candy boxes without feeling sick. But then one year, she did something different. She and her daughter stayed and made heart-shaped pancakes, wrote little notes to themselves, and taped them to the fridge. I'm strong. I'm still here. I am mine. That became their tradition. No gifts, no pressure, just truth, just survival. And over time, survival turned into joy. Rachel reclaimed Valentine's Day, not as a celebration of romance, but of resilience. And she's not alone. I've heard from people who host survivor suppers on February 14th, dinners with friends who've also left toxic relationships, where they raise a glass to boundaries, to second chances, to self-love. Others write anonymous letters to shelters, donate, or volunteer. They take all the energy they use to pour into someone else's validation and give it to those still climbing out. It's beautiful, really, because it proves something we often forget. Valentine's Day doesn't belong to couples. It doesn't belong to corporations. It belongs to anyone who chooses love, real love, even if that love starts with themselves. And I think that's the message I want to leave with, at least for now. We've seen the worst this holiday can bring out in people. But we've also seen what happens when people take their pain and build something better from it. That's not just survival. That's transformation. In the next chapter, I want to bring everything together, a kind of reflection on everything we've uncovered about love, loss, violence, and the complex human need for connection. Because, whether we want to admit it or not, this day touches everyone in one way or another. Chapter 15. Love in the Shadow of Crime. A final reflection. So here we are. After everything we've talked about the dark history of Valentine's Day, the myths, the tragedies, the murders, the survivors, I keep asking myself the same question. What are we really celebrating? We call it the Day of Love, but what does that mean really? Because love, as we've seen, isn't always sweet. It isn't always safe. Sometimes it's violent, messy, manipulative. Sometimes it leaves bruises, not just on the skin, but deep inside in places no one else can see. And yet, love is also what people fight for, what they risk everything for. It's what keeps people going through courtrooms, hospital stays, years of healing. It's complicated. And that's the thing I've realized the most while creating this series. Valentine's Day isn't just a feel-good holiday with roses and chocolate. It's a mirror. It reflects whatever love has meant to you in your life, whether that's comfort or chaos, joy or grief, safety or fear. For some people, it's a reminder of who they lost. For others, it's a celebration of finally getting free. And for many, it's just another day. But even then, it carries this quiet weight, like you're supposed to feel something, even if you don't know what. But maybe the real truth is this: love is not a holiday. It's not a box of candy or a dinner reservation. It's not flowers that wilt in a week or a post on social media. It's the way you let someone exist without fear. It's the way you choose kindness when you could choose silence. It's the way you walk away from pain or walk with someone through theirs. It's messy, it's hard, it's not always pretty. But when it's real, when it's not about power or possession, it doesn't kill. It doesn't control. It doesn't silence. And that's what I hope this story leaves you with. Not just the horror of what some people do in the name of love, but the awareness, the clarity, the space to question what love really looks like in your life. Because if someone says they love you, but it comes with pain control or fear, that's not love. If you've survived that kind of love, you're not broken. You're not hard to love. You were just handed a lie and told it was affection. And if you're still in that place, still unsure, still holding your breath, you deserve better. Not perfect, just safe. Just real. So this Valentine's Day, or any day really, maybe don't ask yourself who loves me. Maybe ask, what does love feel like when it's healthy? Does it let me be myself? Does it make me smaller? Or does it let me grow? That's the kind of love worth celebrating. And if you haven't found it yet, that's okay. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is learn to give it to yourself first. Thanks for sitting with me through all of this. These stories aren't easy, but they're important. Because love, the real kind, starts with truth. And that's what True Crime Echoes will always be about. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, love is never supposed to hurt. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for sitting with the discomfort, the complexity, and the truth. Love isn't always soft, and sometimes the most dangerous things come wrapped in tenderness. But by telling these stories, by naming the darkness, we give others the courage to step into the light. If today's episode stirred something in you, a memory, a realization, a wound, know that you're not alone. You are never alone. On this Valentine's Day or any day, choose the kind of love that lets you breathe, that lets you grow, that lets you go if you need to. I'm True Crime Echoes, and this is True Crime Echoes. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and above all, stay safe.